Good morning. Welcome. This is Angela Coulter, Consciousness Transformation Ascension Guide, originator of Trinity Energy Progression. And I'm here to do my weekly Living the Shift live stream / podcast. I'm still working out the kinks. So, I have so many. The thing is, the challenge is every week coming. Well, first of all, that I do this every week, and it might end up being that I have other downloads that come up. That I just do on audio as I go, but everything changes so much day to day right now that it's actually a challenge for me to say, well, what one thing to talk about this week? And we have so many really advanced things to talk about, and there's just so much wild stuff going on. But so I just asked, well, what is it for me to talk about today? And it really sort of surprised me what came to me a little while ago, which was to talk about the how to reinvent, how to rewrite relationships, how to see them in a different way from a more conscious perspective, how to see them as a reflection of ourselves, because that's really what they are. I actually have been doing this full time now for like 9 years and 9 years. And I've worked with a lot of people who come in with relationship issues and also questions about what do I do about my relationship, wanting to break up from a marriage, not unhappy in a marriage, unhappy in a relationship, I'm unhappy because I don't have a relationship. So it covers the full gamut. Okay. What is really important to remember, number one, is this. In the past, when we have really approach the relationship topic, we do so often from a very egoic perspective and actually a big perspective of lack. And if you look at even our culture is huge. Actually, the whole world's culture is huge on saying, oh, well, you're not complete unless you're in a love relationship or a romantic relationship. You have to do this because they're family. Like, how many times have you heard these kind of topics, sayings, right? Don't do this. You have to do this because it's family, right? Or I need this person to complete me, right? Think of how much, we had a whole Academy Award winning movie that was based on that, like, you complete me. And it's like we've romanticized the lack for so long that we don't realize that that's not what we need in higher consciousness. As we develop and step into come into our own power and authenticity, what's really important is to recognize a couple of things. When we look at the multiverse as everything or outside of us, outside of what we see from the inside, right, is a reflection in some way, shape, or form of what's inside of us, we realize that anything, that we might be reflecting is just something we're looking at. If we feel like something needs to complete us, then we need to look at where that need is, right? What's important to look at is where we believe we have to have that hole filled, because obviously then not only just how we have to have that hole filled, but we also believe that we have a hole to begin with, right? And that goes back to this perspective of I am imperfect, right? And we always say as humans, we're imperfect. I hear that too. Or I'm like, I'm going to stop giving up trying to be perfect because I'm never perfect. And it's almost like time to tweak that too, right? Because the perspective from higher consciousness is that we're all perfect. Because if we're all divine, which we are, as I understand it, we are all embodiments of the divine. How would we be imperfect in any way? And yes, don't mistake the word imperfect for in separation and self-limitation, because that's part of the lessons that we have set up to learn when we incarnate into separate bodies as the divine incarnate separately in these different facets of this beautiful gem. And it's this forgetfulness that we've forgotten that we are perfect and whole, and we are divine and infinite, and that we need nothing outside of us, only to recognize what we already have. So I spend a lot of time with that. I spend a lot of time with people who come in. I've worked a lot with couples that come in to me and talk about, they're unhappy. They don't know if they should divorce or separate, or even people who come into me and say, I know that this relationship doesn't serve me anymore. It's not completely unhappy. From the outside, many people think it's like sort of perfect, but really I need to go. I need to leave. I'm getting this push to leave, and it's okay because I'm comfortable, but I know it's time for something more. That's one of the hardest places to be in our society and culture, because there's so much judgment around that. When somebody says, well, what's the matter? This person's you're not being abused, you're not being neglected, blah, blah, blah. You don't have a lot of issues. What's the problem? Like, that means, why would you get divorced? Why would you leave this relationship? And part of it goes back to this outdated belief system of what relationships are supposed to do, or what they're supposed to do for us. Okay. And what purpose they serve in our realities. We talk about, think of, like I was saying, how much we think, and marriages, right? I always say we have to rewrite the entire book on marriage and what that's supposed to mean. Because for the longest time it was, that's, you get married, you're supposed to be married for life. And if you're not, that's a failure. So many still hold on to that, right? There was a person that I've known really well who's very conscious, who's been through probably a 5-year process of coming into her own, finding her happiness, finding her power, and then reassessing her marriage to say, you know what, this doesn't really serve me anymore, right? So it's like, I am, she comes to the, hey, Lisa. So she comes to this place of saying, I'm looking for something different, right? It's time for me to look for something different. And it, in its natural form, came to the place of not only like, and the hardest challenge that she had to do with the realization in a conversation one day that her parents had been, this really solid, couple, and they'd been married their entire lives. And so they were talking about, and how she always believed that because of the way her parents had been, that she needed to have a marriage like that no matter what, they were supposed to be together. And so even though she was stepping into her power, finding her authenticity, remembering that, and her passions and everything else, and in doing so, outgrew the relationship, or not really outgrew it, but came to the point where the relationship didn't serve her in the way that it had before. And she knew it was time to move on, but she was holding herself back. And she kept on saying, oh, but, we'll still work out no matter what. Then there were really signs of it, starting to shift and release. And she was just like, no, we'll get through this, or it's just a different kind of marriage and whatever. And so one day we were talking about it, and I said, well, what if you just accepted the possibility that you might move on? And I'm not saying that it's gonna break up. I'm gonna say, what if you just accepted it in this fluidity of neutrality to say, what if it didn't? And she's like, oh, well, and then she balked. And I said, but you're balking, and that means there's a trigger, which means there's resistance, which means there's a limitation, a belief of limitation for you to look at. And this is how this stuff starts to work when we look at it from higher consciousness. And so when she looked at it, she goes, well, you know what it is? She goes, it was my parents. It only took her, once she finally would look at it and we looked at that seed, she was like, you know what? She goes, it was my parents, because I believe that no matter what, that's what marriage is supposed to be. And I mean, this is a woman who'd been married for, I think it was over 30 years at this point. And that was when that day, I think, was the day she was able to finally let go and really look at the bigger picture and say, you know what? I don't think this marriage serves us anymore. Not me, but either one of us. And so she's actually in the process of getting divorced. But here's the thing, that's not a bad thing. We have this perception, that if it's time to end a marriage, it's a bad thing, that was a failure. However, oftentimes, like anything else, any other relationship in our lives, when we come to a point where we're not being served in the highest and best way in a relationship, and I'm talking about both parties involved, or more than two in some cases, then it's, if we stop the judgments on what it's supposed to be and step back and looked at it with this objective perspective and said, okay, it doesn't. So can we just kiss and hug, thank each other with love, and then consciously separate, right? There's a lot of discussion now about conscious separation. It's really challenging today with us awakening and accelerating our consciousness, and this huge acceleration of consciousness and remembrance and coming into our own and all that kind of stuff, that it is really challenging to even be in a like a long-term relationship in any kind of way that's anything but, I am just so happy we're on this together, instead of I need you for this, because our needs, our consciousness changes like hour to hour today. And so we get so stuck in, oh no, I'm supposed to be with him forever or her forever, that we then like, or I've been with them for 25, 35 years, 10 years, 15 years, whatever, or we have kids together. You know, there are so many reasons why we decide to be in a marriage. And often it's financial, right? But all those things are just things. And really the answer to step back is thing to do is step back and to say, does this serve us? And when we can do that from a place of not need, because that includes financial need, right? I know people like, and there are many who I've worked with who come in and they're like, oh, well, I'm just staying together for the kids. And I'm like, that is one of the worst reasons to choose to be together with somebody in a marriage. Because what happens is that continues this belief, like this teaches your children, by the way, because they know more so than they ever like let on. And I've worked with so many people who, you know, with them and their children, you know, in breaking up consciously, that they know. Usually when they tell their kids they're splitting up, they're like, oh yeah, okay, we figured. So what happens when you're in a marriage or relationship where you say, well, I'm going to stay in it for the kids, right? But the kids know that there's tension and that you're sacrificing your happiness to be with this person to make it look like something that it's not. You then teach the kids to do the same thing in their lives. And I always say that to the parents who say things like that to me, because I'm like, so do you want your kids to sacrifice their happiness just for how it looks to other people? And pretty much every time I say that, they're like, no, they don't ever look at it that way. So there's a lot of stuff. I mean, I could talk about this forever, because I've done, like I said, and there's a whole book that I need to write, or that I'm ready to write, about rewriting relationships and rewriting marriage. Because when we come to a place of completion, you know, and then that's the other thing is people are like, oh, okay, well, I worked on myself for 2 weeks. Now, when am I going to find my Prince Charming, you know, or my perfect woman? And I just laugh, because I'm like, so continue the self-work, because the key is you're going to find the best, most awesome match for you when you don't feel like you need them. And it sounds illogical, counter to logic in the mind. And it is, because the mind thinks, oh, I need somebody to make me happy. But when we're happy and we don't need somebody, we then attract people of higher vibration that don't need us and we don't need them. And then we actually just have a better time playing together. So, it's really funny. My husband, who I've been with, I think, 26 years I've been with him. We'll be married 25 years next year. You know, people ask me, oh, well, what's the secret? And I'm like, well, first of all, I don't look at it as it has to be for the rest of my life. But the biggest thing to me that comes to mind is in the point in my life when I met my husband, I basically had gone through a bunch of different kinds of relationships and whatever. And I was just like, you know what? Here I am. Love me, leave me. That's fine. Let's have a great time together. And if not, it'll be time to move on. And he was in the same place. And neither of us were looking to get in a relationship or get married or anything else. And here we are 26 years later going, okay, let's hang out while we still have a great time together. That's where the difference lies, because when you're needing, you're always in this place of lack, right? And it's a lot of responsibility to put on another person. And like I said, we have in the past romanticized the idea of, oh, this person completes me, or I need this person in my life, or I can't be happy. But when a couple comes into me and they talk about, and first of all, I usually don't see them together. I see them separately, because nobody's ever fully honest in front of their significant other when we get down into deep feelings, because they're afraid of being judged. They're afraid of hurting somebody else's feelings. And I always like, you know what? What's really important is for us to get into the place of finding out where the triggers are laying, in honesty, so that we can look at what's inside of you, because it's never the other person, it's only you. And that's how we work in this higher consciousness. We work in a place of everything outside of me, or every trigger, every separation-based energy or emotion that I have, any judgment, that all comes from something that's within inside me, that's being reflected back to me, that's made me go, well, I don't look at that, so I'm going to judge it and send the arrow out to somebody else. So 2 things that I always say when somebody comes to me about like thinking that it's time for them to move on, right? Because sometimes they're unhappy and then we lead into this. Sometimes they literally come to me to say, I am really unhappy and I want to leave. So the 2 things that I tell them are really important are, number 1, not to make your final decision until you find your own happiness. And number 2, well, actually should be number 1 is, first, before you do anything, find your own happiness without dependency on others. So like, well, I'll say what makes you happy. And by the way, you can't say anybody else. So you can't say my husband or my wife makes me happy, or my kids or my family, none of that. Because the reality is nothing makes us happy. We allow ourselves to be in our happiness, right? When we start taking that self-responsibility from higher consciousness. And so I'm like, and many people come in, and when I say that, they're like, I really don't know. Sometimes it's really challenging for them to disentangle all that, because they were taught. I mean, there was a man that I worked with for a long period of time who, through his separation divorce, the first time he came into me, I'll never forget, he was like, I said, well, what makes you happy? Well, my family. And I'm like, nope, let's get to what makes you happy. And, it would come back to the family, and then he'd be like, well, you don't understand. And he said, well, you don't understand. I was brought up in a family. My father taught me that, what makes a good man is to provide and support his family. And I'm like, except that's an externalization. And really, it's really important to find that happiness on the inside. And I'll tell you why. It takes away the need, right? And we find that happiness on the inside. We then emanate our happiness, and we emanate in a higher vibration of love. And we stand in a place of self-empowerment and authenticity and just power, right? And when we do that, and then we realize number 2 is, I don't need anybody to make me this way, because I already am this way. And then it just spreads, and it's infectious to everybody else. And then people who would like to be around that, or who are matching that kind of vibration, they're going to want to be around you. And wouldn't you prefer to be with someone who is already happy in themselves and just likes to share the road with you? We think, like I said, we've had this big romanticism, and look at our movies and books and stories from ages of, this epic, oh, I need my husband, I need my wife, I need this person in my life to make me happy, and I'll do anything so that we're together. The time for that is over, because it's time for us to get to this place of self-realization, to say, I am so happy with me. And then you're not looking for it too. And then, by the way, but anyhow, the reason that I say this to anybody who comes in about about coupling or decoupling or whatever, I say, first, let's find your happiness, and let's see what's preventing you from living your happiness. And it's not another person. It's always you. It's what the other person reflects back to you that causes you to be unhappy, right? To recognize your own unhappiness. So that's why you project it onto them, and you get angry at them, and you get pissy about the cap being left off of the toothpaste, and that's why you want a divorce. And it's really not anything about that. So, and then we get addicted to the drama, right? Of, oh, like, we fight, but we've got to be together. We're, and all that kind of stuff. And it's like, well, those are all ego-based and very low vibration, really, in the bigger scheme of things. The epic battle or the fight to have to get there. And how much easier is it when you can just say, yep, so happy to be here. So happy we're together. And then I'll be okay. And by the way, I'll be okay when we're not. And that's like every day, that's in our lives. And that's not just with spouses. This is also with our family and friends. I have friends all over the world, and it's awesome to me because I can be fully present and in this space of huge amounts of love with my friends. And we can spend so much awesome time together, and we have these awesome, amazing, multidimensional experiences. And then when it's time to go, it's like, okay, yeah, I'm going to miss you in the person, but we're always together, in oneness. And okay, now I can go home because I don't need you to be with me and attached at my hip in the physical every, given moment. These are different ways to start looking at relationships. And if we're looking at relationships, it's really funny. There's somebody that I've been talking to, and she's like, okay, I did the self-work. Now, when am I going to find somebody? Why don't I deserve, or how about this one? Why don't I deserve to be in a good relationship? That's what I get a lot. And I say, you know what? You do. And the first relationship you deserve to be great with is the one with yourself. And many don't get that, but that's really, anyway, I'm sorry, I keep on digressing because there are so many ways to go with this. But once we find our happiness, then from that place of happiness, now here's the thing. Often I've had people that were dead set on getting divorced and come into me. And whether it's the couple that I'm seeing separately or the individual, one of the individuals, they do this shifting, and we do energy work together, and they do life work on their own, and find where their happiness comes from. I've seen miraculous transformations to a place of, I can be with this person. Actually, now that I stopped blaming them for all the stuff that I was bringing on myself, wow, we have a much different relationship. And yeah, there was a little bit of a bumpy ride there, because when we get into long-term relationships, we get into places where we get into habits of interactions and roles that we're used to playing and we're used to other people playing, right? So again, what I see a lot is people who have been, especially those who've been like stay-at-home mothers, right? They gave up a career. They never, they just stayed home with their kids. And then, but they have like the higher self is like going, okay, yep, because they sacrifice. And it's not really because they did, because they feel like they were supposed to, because they were the mother, and and like, oh, okay. And so then the mother role defines them and makes them believe that they're a better person because they believe they're a better mother. And then this is how it all goes. And then they really aren't happy because they're sacrificing what they really want. And it's not being a mother 100%, because it's only a little tiny piece of who we are. And so then what happens is they get more and more resentful. They get more and more depressed. They get more dejected. They get resentful to their spouse. But often it's been an agreement. And more often than not today, it's not because the spouse like expects that they had to do that, but it was an agreement that they made because, the woman said, oh, I'll stay home with the kids. Because, it's better that way. Because culture tells you it's better that way. And because why? Because a woman's supposed to be a good mother, right? Well, then they resent that, and they go to resent that. But their self-worth is so low that they feel like that mother role has to define them. So that therefore they have to do everything that they know to fit that mother role, right? And make them look good to other people, who then will say, oh, you're such a good mother. And then that makes them feel good as a person, because they don't feel good about themselves as a person on their own. That's where the self-happiness comes from. So when we disengage and disentangle all of that, and we can get to that place where we can find that happiness on our own without depending on other people to do it, then guess what happens? All of the relationships change. Yes, the roles fall apart sometimes, and they can be really rocky for a little while, because then, the kids, the spouse, all, they've gotten into this like dependency on the person to do all this stuff so that they don't have to do it. But this is another thing that I talk about a lot is, what's interesting is that when we continue to do things for other people, like so that they don't have to do them, because we think that that's like being a good mother, a good friend, a good spouse, a good martyr, whatever, yeah, and we have idealized that over the eons, that we feel like that's, like if we didn't do that, that the person or people involved would be at a loss, except that's really the opposite. And I have a whole thing to talk about that. We sort of live in this opposite world. Like that's the really funny thing is the more I go in consciousness in this, it's really funny. But we're actually doing, when we continuously do something for somebody who's in lack or whatever, and this happens a lot in the parenting thing, we actually do a disservice to the other people because it prevents them from stepping into their journey and accomplishing it themselves. So what happens when you walk in front of a bus, have a heart attack and die or whatever, and then they have to do it? Guess what? That usually happens because they have to do it, because otherwise they won't learn the lessons they came here to learn. So one of the most challenging things is teaching parents, both mothers and fathers, to love their children and obviously nurture them and teach them and guide them, but also to know how to step back and observe and let their kids also have their own journeys. So that's what I tell to parents who are looking at getting divorced. And then we talk about, it's okay, because what you're teaching your kids, if you do it consciously, especially as you can decide it's time to move on from a relationship in a healthy way that's positive and supportive and still be friends and part of each other's lives, and yet be free to be who you are, right? And number two, that you're allowed to really step back and say, you know what? I thought this was the direction, or it was good. This direction for me was good for a while, and now I'm going to change it because I'm in a different place, and I'm free to do that. And we have all of these, stigmas against being selfish, right? And I was talking about this with a friend the other day, yesterday, I think. But, this whole thing, this word selfish is taken like a curse word. And the thing, but when we shift it all around to be what did we say? I was just when I was in Peru, one of the people in the group, they called it self-fulfilling, something like that. I can't even remember. Self-filling. What if we said self-filling or self-fulfilling instead of selfish? That doesn't sound really bad, right? Like, why wouldn't we want to be self-fulfilling? And that is where it's time for us to shift into this place of self-fulfillment and happiness and living in a space of love and expressing your love as this divine, self-empowered, authentic being. When we do that, by the way, it does make us better mothers and fathers and better spouses and friends and daughters and parents and all kinds of daughters and sons and parents and whatever, and neighbors and workers. Because when we do that, because, it's sort of like I always talk about, on an airplane, right? If the air masks come down, if the oxygen masks come down, you make sure you put it on yourself first before helping the person next to you. And yet we live in this society, in this world that believes you need to do the opposite. And what I tell people all the time is when the well runs dry, you can't help anybody. But if you nourish that well, and first and foremost, ensure that well is filled and vibrant and, emanating love, then it has nothing to do but gush over and help others. And then guess what? Others become more motivated to be the same of themselves. So it's living the example. And that's living the shift. That's living in a new place and recognizing that if we spend all this time and energy focusing on who's my perfect mate, where's my perfect mate, and even the other one is like the new catchphrase and the not really new, but the big catchphrase in the spiritual is my twin flame, and that's an entire 5 shows and 3 books I could write about that. We'll get on a different day. Doesn't matter. Same difference. The highest vibrational relationships are when we come to a place of saying, I am complete within myself, and I appreciate you here on the journey with me, and I really enjoy our time together, and I'm just going to be present in that right now. and we'll see that where that takes us. Feel how free that energy is, instead of saying, oh, I need you in my life. No matter what, I need to have you. And I'll give everything else up to be with you. That is so self-limiting. It's so sacrificial, and it's so lack-based. So it's time for us to shift our perspective, because when we do, and again, it comes back to what? It comes back to that self-work, back to this place of truly making it our life's purpose to be in a space of unconditional self-love, and to remember our bliss and to embody that, because everything, relationships of all kinds, everything around us then becomes blissful as well. So food for thought. And the thing is, so I guess for this week is to look at your relationships. One of the most challenging is people stay in their marriages because they feel like, financial issues or whatever. And yeah, when you find your happiness, either it shifts, or you find the worth within you to say, I'm actually allowed to bring in my own money, or I can trust that the universe is going to support me without having to depend on somebody else. Sometimes, as I've known people as well, the universe will just keep on pushing, because then something happens, and then financial stuff crashes, and then all that kind of stuff. It's like, well, so now why are you staying? So look at your relationships and look in the mirror and say, so where am I coming to all my relationships in a place of need, right? Oh, do I feel fulfilled as a mother because I feel like I'm a good mother? Well, that's externalization of our worth. So then it's like, well, how do I feel? Where do I feel worthy of myself, of being myself? Where am I allowed to be myself? And what is my joy? What is the expression of my bliss? Because if I don't know that, that's where the focus is to be before any relationships, before looking at any relationships and the value of those. So, food for thought this week. I will have, I'm working on a program that I think I'm going to start in January. That's going to be called, I know I can't probably call it because of Nike, but I want to call it Just Do It. And it's not just for relationships, but for anything in people's lives where, they want to change and they're ready to change it, but they're not sure where to start, because it's all the same kind of principle. And I've worked, like I said, now almost 9 years, and helping so many people do that, because and it's so amazing. And to me, it's the most fulfilling thing, is watching people step into their own power, finding their happiness, so that then their entire lives change. And so everybody thinks it's like, oh, it's got to be this kind of focus or whatever. It's like, no, how about we just do it, instead of, well, I'm going to read, or I'm going to read 500 books, or I'm going to look at all these seminars, or I'm going to watch all these shows, and I'm not really going to do anything about it. But how about we just get out there and do it, and then really be able to live the life we want. So anyway, just a side note. Have a great week. We'll see you next time on Living the Shift. This is Angela Coulter signing out. Have a good one. Bye.